Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I used to think substations were boring. That was my whole job, making sure the boring stayed boring. I'm Nate Kessler, 36, Utility Protection and Control Technician. One of those people who spends more time with relays, wiring diagrams, and test sets than with other humans. If you've ever driven past a chain link fence full of gray cabinets and porcelain insulators and wondered what that place even does, that was my world. I wasn't a lineman climbing poles in storms. I was the guy in the control house with a clipboard, a meter, and a radio, keeping the invisible parts of the grid from doing something dramatic. When the outbreak started, drama showed up everywhere, all at once, like somebody threw a breaker on the whole city. It began with a notification on my phone while I was standing in a cramped relay room, looking at a panel labeled Bus Diff. The panel was older than me, painted that faded utility beige with black engraved nameplates, and it had a faint smell of warm dust and transformer oil that never really leaves your clothes. The notification was a local news alert about unexplained violence near a hospital. 10 minutes later, the dispatcher called and told me to wrap up and get to the yard gate because the company was pulling field crews off the street. "Is it riots?" I asked, half joking. "It's not riots," she said. Her voice had that tight, controlled sound like she was reading from a script someone wrote in a panic. "Just get to a safe place. Do you have fuel? Do you have food?" My dispatcher wasn't supposed to ask me that. I stepped outside the control house. The substation yard around me was a geometry lesson. Aluminum buswork, steel structures, wave traps, big porcelain bushings, and the giant transformer sitting like a beached animal on its concrete pad. The air hummed faintly. The grid was still alive then. You could feel it in your bones if you knew what to listen for. A car screamed by on the street outside the fence and clipped a curb hard enough to throw sparks. 2 more followed. People were fleeing without knowing what they were fleeing from. On the far side of the yard, one of the older guys, Mitch, was slamming the door of a station service panel. "Gate's locked," he called. "Company says we're done. No more drive-outs." Mitch was 62, nearing retirement, and he looked like he'd just watched the ocean turn into fire. "You seeing this?" he asked. A man on the sidewalk outside the fence was banging his head against a utility pole, not hitting the pole with his fists, hitting it with his forehead again and again, as if the pole had offended him. A woman tried to grab his arm. He spun and shoved her down and then kept going, head to wood, like he didn't even feel it. Mitch whispered, "What's wrong with him?" I didn't answer because I didn't have one. I only knew one thing. The way the man moved wasn't the way a person moved. The dispatcher's voice came back to me. Not riots. I drove out before the gate was fully shut because Mitch was still inside and I didn't want to be trapped there with him, not in the moment where nobody knew anything. I headed south through Philadelphia with my company truck's logo practically glowing like a target. The city was mid-afternoon loud. Sirens, horns, people shouting. The traffic lights still worked. The radio still worked. But the rhythm was off, like a song you've heard 1,000 times and somebody changed one note. I got a text from my sister, Claire. She lived in South Philly in a row house with her husband and 2 kids. "Where are you? School's just locked down. Something is happening." I pulled into a small parking lot beside an old distribution substation building I knew well. Not the big high-voltage yard with towering structures, but a brick and concrete station tucked into the neighborhood, built like a bunker on purpose. It had a plain steel door, few windows, and a fenced yard behind it where pad-mounted equipment sat in neat rows. A lot of people walked past it every day without understanding it was one of the places that made the city livable. The old substation sat at Federal Street in Pensport, a weird mix of residential blocks and industrial edges. I'd done relay work there years ago when they were planning to retire some of the old gear. The building was thick masonry with a reinforced interior. It had a control room, a small shop space, a restroom, and, most important for me in that moment, a break room set back behind concrete walls. I parked the truck and sat for a second with my hand on the steering wheel. I told myself I was just stopping to think, to call my sister, to let the streets cool down. But I already knew I was choosing the substation. Because in my line of work, if you're caught outside during a storm, you go to the strongest building you can reach, and this was the strongest one in my mental map. I called Claire. She answered on the second ring, breathless. "Nate? I'm okay. Are you okay?" "We're in the house." Mark barricaded the back door with the kitchen table. "The kids are upstairs. What is it?" The neighbor said, "People are biting." I swallowed. "Don't open the door for anyone, not even if they sound normal. Stay inside, lock everything. Do you have water?" "We have tap water." "For now," I said. "Fill containers, bathtub, anything clean, now." There was a pause, like she didn't want to listen to me because listening made it real. "I'm coming to you," I said, and meant it in the moment, because that's what you say to your sister. But then I looked at my phone, news alerts stacking up like dominoes. Hospitals overwhelmed, police requesting help, transit shut down, videos of people moving wrong, eyes blank, faces smeared with something I didn't want to identify, crowding a street in Center City like a tide. If I drove to Claire's, I might not make it. And if I did make it, I might bring danger to her door. My chest tightened. "I'm going to a safe place nearby," I told her. "A substation building. Thick walls, I'll keep in contact." "A substation?" she said, like I'd said I was moving into a shark tank. "It's built like a vault. I know the layout. I can lock it down." "Come here," she begged. "Please." "I can't," I said quietly. "Not yet. Keep your phone charged. Text me every hour." I ended the call before I could change my mind. Then I did something that still makes me feel cold when I remember it. I turned my phone to low power mode, took a breath, and walked toward the steel door of the substation. The building's entry was a standard industrial setup, solid steel door with a commercial lock set, concrete threshold, and a small vestibule. Inside, the air was stale but not rotten. It smelled like old coffee, dust, and that faint ozone scent you get near electrical rooms. There was no hum in here because the equipment was mostly de-energized, part of the reason it was being phased out. But the building still had life support basics. A DC battery bank in a back room that used to keep protection circuits alive during outages, and an old station service panel for building lights and receptacles when the utility feed was available. The power was still on, at least right then. I moved through the building like I'd walked it yesterday. Control room first, the old mimic bus diagram on the wall, the faded labels, the empty spaces where modern digital relays would have been, the radio cabinet, the phone line terminal, the metal desk with a chair that had survived decades of bored operators. I checked the restroom. Water still ran. I opened the janitor closet, bleach, paper towels, a mop. I opened cabinets, some stale snacks, instant coffee, plastic cups. In the break room, a cheap couch and a laminated table sat under a vent that ran up through the building. It wasn't a home, but it could be. I pulled my company truck closer to the building, inside the small yard where a gate and fence still stood. The fence wasn't tall enough to stop someone determined, but it stopped casual curiosity. And I had something most people didn't: time, tools, and the kind of brain that solves problems by drawing boxes around them. I started with the door. The break room itself was behind an internal corridor that had 2 heavy doors between it and the exterior. The building's exterior doors were solid, but glass existed in places I didn't like. I wanted a hardened core, a place I could retreat to if someone breached the outside. The break room was my core. In the yard, a utility truck had crashed into a pole sometime earlier. One of our older rigs, ladder rack bent, bed twisted. The driver was gone, which I didn't think about too hard because thinking about it made me sick. I scavenged steel plates from the truck's side panels. Not thick armor plate, just heavy sheet metal, but enough to reinforce weak spots. I carried them inside and leaned them against walls until I was ready. My tool bag was a blessing. Lineman's pliers, a drill, bits, a hammer, pry bar, tape measure, gloves. I also had rolls of electrical conduit in the shop area, metal tubing used to protect wires. Conduit is tough. You can't bend it easily without tools. It's made to take hits. I cut sections of conduit to brace the break room door from the inside. I didn't build anything fancy. I didn't have time to become an engineer in a movie. I simply used what I had. I set the conduit horizontally across the door, anchored into the wall on both sides using heavy brackets I found in the supply cabinet. The result looked crude, but if someone tried to push through, they'd be fighting the wall itself. I covered the small break room window that looked into the corridor using steel plates screwed into the frame. No line of sight meant no easy target. Then, I reinforced the corridor's outer door with 2 more conduit braces and a wedge made from a chunk of hardwood I found in a pallet stack. It wasn't elegant, it was stubborn. When I finished, my arms shook with fatigue, and I realized I hadn't eaten since morning. I opened a packet of crackers and forced myself to chew while listening. Outside, the city's sound was changing. Sirens still wailed, but fewer now, like the responders were running out of fuel or courage. Somewhere nearby, glass shattered. A dog barked nonstop and then abruptly went silent. That night, I saw the infected for the first time up close. I was sitting in the control room with the lights off, only a small flashlight in my lap, when something scraped against the fence outside. I crawled to a corner where I could see through a narrow gap in a boarded window. 3 figures moved along the sidewalk, drifting more than walking. They bumped into each other, then separated, then drifted again, as if their bodies were following a signal their minds couldn't interpret cleanly. One of them stopped and turned toward the substation fence. I held my breath. It stepped closer, its head tilted like a person listening to a distant sound. Then it pressed both hands against the chain link and shook it hard enough to make the metal rattle. The noise echoed down the street, loud in the empty hours. The other 2 turned instantly. They moved toward the fence with sudden speed that didn't match their earlier drift. It wasn't a sprint like an athlete. It was a lurching rush, all momentum, no balance. They grabbed the fence and shook it too, metal hitting metal. The sound drew more. In the darkness, I saw them emerge. One, then another, then a cluster. It was like watching moths find a light, except the light was noise, and the moths were people who shouldn't have been moving. I backed away slowly and moved deeper into the building. Every instinct screamed to run, but I had nowhere to run to. This was my vault. The whole point was staying. I retreated to the break room core and sat with my back against the wall, listening to the fence rattle until it didn't anymore. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Claire. We heard screams. Mark says we have to leave tomorrow. Where would we go? I stared at the message until the words blurred. I wanted to tell her to come to me. I wanted to tell her I'd built a safe place, but I couldn't picture her walking through these streets with 2 kids, trying to get through the chaos, showing up at my fence while infected, wandered nearby and desperate people watched for any sign of shelter. This place was safe because nobody knew it was safe. I typed slowly, "Stay inside. If you leave, only in daylight. Avoid crowds. Avoid anyone acting strange. Fill water tonight, I'm here. I'll check in every hour." I sent it and felt like a liar because I didn't know if any plan mattered. By morning, the power flickered. I knew what that meant before the lights even went out. In a healthy grid, local outages happen all the time. A tree hits a line. A transformer fails. A breaker trips. Crews respond, isolate the fault, restore service. But that requires people, dispatchers, operators, line crews, control center staff, technicians. It requires communication and coordination and the willingness to drive into danger to fix invisible problems. The outbreak was eating the people who made the grid work. When the lights blinked, I walked into the electrical room and opened the station service panel. The utility feed was still present but unstable. Voltage dropped, climbed, dropped again. The old meters wavered. Then everything went dead. Silence filled the building like water. For a moment, I thought the whole place had died. Then a faint click came from the DC room, and the emergency lights, small, dim fixtures, came on. The battery bank had picked up some loads. It wasn't meant to power the building for long, but it would keep minimal systems alive. I went to the DC room and looked at the battery racks. Big lead-acid cells in a row, each one a heavy block with caps and cables. Above them, the charger cabinet sat dark now because it needed AC power. I did a quick mental calculation the way I'd done 1,000 times in my job. Battery capacity, load current, time. If I kept loads minimal, I might get a day or two of emergency lighting. Maybe more, but I couldn't rely on it. I needed a new plan. That was when I realized the substation was about to become a beacon to scavengers. People don't understand the grid, but they understand that utility buildings might have fuel, tools, copper, or batteries. When everything goes dark, they start looking for anything that smells like infrastructure. And the minute someone found my building and decided it was worth prying open, I'd have two kinds of threats: the infected outside and the living who wanted what I had. I spent the next day doing what I did best, making lists, prioritizing, and working the problem. Water first. The building still had municipal water pressure for now. I filled every container I could find: mop bucket, coffee urn, plastic jugs from the supply cabinet, even the restroom sink basin with a clean trash liner. I filled the bathtub-like janitor basin. Anything that could hold water became a reservoir. Food next. I inventoried what I had: a few snack bars, crackers, instant coffee, sugar packets. Not enough. I'd have to scavenge, but I needed to do it smart. Power. I needed light at night without advertising myself. I found a box of chemical light sticks, old safety inventory, and set them aside for emergencies. I found a couple of battery-powered lanterns in the cabinet and turned them off. Batteries were gold now. Ventilation. The building's vents were high above ground level, built for airflow and heat dissipation from equipment. That was good. It meant I could keep air moving without opening windows. I cleaned the vent screens and checked for gaps where a person could reach in. The vents were too small for a body, but hands could still cause trouble. I reinforced the interior around them with wire mesh and screwed down plates. Then I built what I called dead zones around the perimeter. Not traps meant to hurt, but obstacles and noisemakers meant to slow and warn. I dragged scrap lumber, old pallets, and chunks of concrete from behind the yard and arranged them in messy piles near likely approach routes. If someone tried to move quickly, they'd trip, stumble, and make noise. I strung simple trip lines with empty cans in the darker corners, not hidden, not malicious, just a perimeter alarm that would tell me if something was near. Yeah, I also scattered loose gravel and broken brick in a strip near the building wall. Footsteps on gravel have a sound you can't fake. By evening, the yard looked like a place people wouldn't want to step into. That was the point. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 2 a.m, the fence rattled again, and I heard voices outside, human voices, tense and whispered. "Cut it," one said. "Shut up, man, I'm trying." "Us." A metallic snip sounded, followed by the soft slap of chain link falling loose. My stomach went cold. Someone was breaching the yard. I turned off my lantern and moved into the corridor, staying behind cover where I could see the interior entry without exposing myself. My heart hammered so hard I was sure they'd hear it. The outer door thumped. A pry bar scraped. Then a voice. "This is it. Utility buildings always got good stuff." Another voice, female, harsh. "We take what we need and go. Quiet." The door rattled again. I didn't shout. Shouting made you a target. I waited until the door finally gave just enough for them to slip through the vestibule and into the main hall. They had flashlights. That was what I saw first. Thin beams slicing through darkness. Then silhouettes. 3 people, maybe 4. I stepped out just enough to be seen and said, low and firm, "Stop, back out." They froze. One of the flashlights snapped toward my face. A man began. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "But this building is occupied. You need to leave." They stared like they couldn't believe anyone had claimed this place. The woman stepped forward, slightly, flashlight steady. "We're looking for batteries and tools. We're not here to hurt you." "Then don't," I said. "Leave now." A younger man behind her shifted nervously. "Lady, we need this. My brother's hurt." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "But if you make noise, you'll bring them. And if you push this, somebody gets hurt. Back out, I can give you water." The word water changed the air. Everyone wanted water. The woman's shoulders tightened. "How much?" I thought fast. If I gave too much, I'd weaken myself. If I gave nothing, they might take. "I'll fill 2 bottles," I said. "And I'll give you a flashlight if you leave quietly and don't come back." The younger man licked his lips. "We don't want trouble." "Then don't make any," I said. I stepped back into the restroom area, keeping my body behind the wall, and filled 2 bottles from my stored containers. I grabbed a cheap flashlight from a drawer, one of those plastic ones from the safety kit. When I returned, I slid the supplies across the floor toward them. No sudden moves, no bravado. The woman watched me like a hawk, then she nodded once. "Thank you." They backed out. Slow. The younger man whispered, "Sorry, man." When the outer door closed, I locked it again and listened to their footsteps fading. Only when they were gone did I realize my hands were shaking. That was the first time I understood the second wave of the outbreak. Not the infected. The hunger. The next morning, I scouted the neighborhood from a high vent opening near the roof line. I didn't have a rooftop access hatch I trusted, but I could see enough through narrow angles to map movement. The streets were emptier now, but not calm. People moved in small groups. Some carried bags. Some carried improvised weapons, bats, pipes, things that made them feel safer. A few moved with that wrong, drifting gait. The infected weren't everywhere, but they were enough. I needed supplies, but I also needed information, and the best information historically came from radios. In the control room, there was an old handheld VHF radio in a drawer, used for coordination with crews. It was useless now without repeaters, but there was also something better. The building had a small communications cabinet with coax lines that once connected to an external antenna. If I could get an antenna up, even a basic one, and power a radio I might hear something beyond my street. I didn't have a fancy setup, but I had wire, connectors, and the stubborn creativity you get from years of making old equipment talk to new equipment. I built a simple antenna from spare copper wire and mounted it inside the attic space near the vent, keeping it hidden. I ran the coax back down to the control room, where I found an old battery-powered emergency radio in a cabinet, part of a long-forgotten preparedness kit. When I turned it on, a crackle of static filled the room like a ghost. Then, faintly, a voice. All citizens are advised, remain indoors. Do not approach. If you see individuals acting aggressively. The message repeated, broken by interference. It was an official broadcast, but it sounded like it had been recorded hours ago and left running because nobody was left to update it. Still, it meant something. Somebody, somewhere, was transmitting. I listened for an hour, taking notes. Locations mentioned, shelter advisories. A reference to the National Guard. A warning that emergency services were limited. No talk of a cure. No talk of a quick fix. Just survival. That afternoon, I got a new text from Claire. We are leaving. Mark says it's worse. We're going to try to reach his cousin in Jersey. My breath caught. Where are you now? I typed. A minute passed, then heading toward Columbus Blood. Traffic is bad, people everywhere, kids crying. I'm scared. Columbus Boulevard was not far from me, but between us were streets I didn't control. I stared at the message, then at the reinforced door of my breakroom fortress. I could stay hidden and safe, or I could move. I didn't think of myself as a hero. I thought of myself as a guy who fixed problems before they became disasters. But sometimes, the problem is your own fear. I sent Claire a quick reply, stay together, avoid crowds. If you can't move, get indoors. I'm nearby, I'm coming to you. Then I packed. I brought a backpack with water bottles, some snacks, a first aid kit from the safety cabinet, a flashlight, spare batteries, gloves, a compact tool roll, and a small pry bar. I also brought a hard hat, not for style, but because it protected my head. I grabbed a reflective utility vest and then shoved it into the bag because reflection was the last thing I wanted now. Before leaving, I did a quick lockup procedure like it was a workday. Doors secured, interior braces set, supplies cached in the break room. I turned off every light. I left the yard gate closed. I stepped out through a side exit that I could lock behind me, keeping my movement quiet. Oh, the street air hit me like a slap. It smelled like exhaust, stale summer heat trapped between buildings, and something else, a faint sourness that made my stomach turn. I moved fast, staying close to walls, scanning corners the way you do when you've spent years in hazardous environments. I didn't run. Running makes noise and draws attention. I walked with purpose. 2 blocks in, I saw an abandoned car idling against a curb, driver's door open, radio still playing low static. No driver, no passengers. It looked like the city had simply set down its normal life and walked away. Near a corner store, a small group of people argued. One man shouted that the store owner was hoarding water. The owner screamed back, holding a baseball bat. Others watched, too tired to intervene. I passed without stopping. I couldn't fix everything. When I reached Columbus Boulevard, the traffic was a frozen river. Cars jammed bumper to bumper. Some people had abandoned their vehicles and walked with bags. Others sat inside, windows up, eyes wide, as if waiting for a miracle. I searched for Claire's car, an older gray sedan with a dent near the rear bumper. I found it half a block down, stuck between a delivery van and a pickup truck. Mark was outside trying to wave cars forward. Claire stood near the passenger door with the kids, one on each side, gripping their hands so hard their knuckles looked white. Relief flooded me so hard my knees almost gave out. I approached slowly, hands visible, and called, "Claire." Her head snapped toward me. For a second, she didn't recognize me, like she'd forgotten that normal life included her brother. Then her face crumpled. "Nate," she whispered, and it sounded like prayer. Mark stepped between us, eyes wary. "Who are you?" "It's me," I said. "Nate, her brother." He hesitated, then nodded quickly. "We're trying to get out. It's locked." I looked at the traffic and immediately understood. Nobody was moving because something had happened ahead. An accident, a fight, something worse. "How far to Jersey?" I asked. "Could be 10 minutes, Mark said, voice tight. "Could be 10 hours. I glanced around. People were watching. A few figures far down the boulevard moved strangely, weaving between cars. Claire followed my gaze and tightened her grip on the kids. "They're coming." I didn't argue. I didn't waste time debating plans that were already failing. "Listen," I said. "I've got a fortified place 2 minutes away, thick walls, water. We can regroup, then we move when it's safer." Mark's face hardened. "A place? Like what?" "A substation building," I said. "It's secure." He looked like he wanted to say no on principle. But then a scream erupted somewhere ahead, sharp and panicked, and several people started running in different directions. The kids flinched. Claire looked at Mark, pleading without words. Mark swallowed. "Okay," he said. "Okay, lead." We moved along the sidewalk, keeping close together. I took point, scanning ahead. Mark stayed at the back, watching behind us. Claire kept the kids in the middle. We didn't have to go far, but it felt like crossing a continent. At the corner near my substation, we heard the fence rattle. Not from inside, from someone outside, already shaking it. I froze. Mark whispered, "What is that?" I motioned for silence. We crouched behind a parked car and watched. 2 infected were at my yard fence, gripping it, shaking it in bursts. Another wandered nearby, head twitching as if listening for a signal. They weren't coordinated, but they were persistent. I waited, heart pounding. If they were just passing, we could slip in. But if they were attracted to something inside, noise, scent, movement, I might be walking my family into a trap. Then I realized the fence was rattling because of the loose panel the Scavengers had cut the night before. The infected were pushing where the fence had weakened. If they pushed hard enough, the opening would widen. If they got into the yard, they'd be at my doors. I had to act. I didn't charge in like an action movie. I didn't do anything dramatic. I did what I always did, control the situation. I pulled a small metal wrench from my bag and tossed it across the street into a pile of debris. The clatter rang out, sharp and bright. The infected snapped toward the sound instantly. They released the fence and drifted toward the new noise, drawn like magnets. "Now," I whispered. We moved quickly, crossing to the gate. I unlocked it and slipped us into the yard, then closed and relocked it behind us. We moved to the side door, the one I trusted, and I got it open. Inside, the building swallowed us, quiet and dim. Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. The kids looked around with wide eyes. "It's dark," one of them said. "That's on purpose," I told him gently. "Dark means safe." We went deeper into the break room core. I slid the conduit braces into place behind the door. Mark watched silently, then nodded once, impressed despite himself. "You did all this?" he asked. "I'm good with systems," I said. "People, not as much." Claire sat on the couch and pulled the kids close. Her shoulders shook. Mark knelt beside her, rubbing her back awkwardly because he was trying not to fall apart too. I handed them water bottles. "Small sips," I said. "We have enough, but we don't waste." Claire looked up at me. "You saved us." I didn't accept it, not fully, not yet, because saving someone once doesn't mean you can keep them alive in a world that has decided to break. That night, we heard footsteps outside again. Human this time. A voice called softly through the outer door. "Hello? Anyone in there? We saw the gate move." Mark stiffened. "We can't let them in." Claire whispered, "Maybe they need help." I felt the weight of the building, the supplies, the fragile safety. I approached the door but stayed behind cover and called back, "This building is occupied, keep moving, no one is coming out." A pause, then, "Please, we have a child." My stomach clenched. Claire looked at me like I was the judge of the world. I closed my eyes for a second and listened. No frantic shuffling. No aggressive banging, just exhaustion in the voice. I asked, "How many of you?" "3, the voice said. "Me, my wife, our daughter. We're not sick, we're just tired." Mark shook his head hard. I looked at the break room door braces I'd built, the dead zones outside, the limited water, the reality that more people meant more noise, more needs, more risk. And yet, I remembered Claire's text, "I'm scared." Everyone was scared. I cracked the interior corridor door enough to speak through without giving a clear view, and I said, "You can't come in, but I can give you water and a map, if you stay quiet and move on." There was a pause, and then a small voice, childlike, said, "Please." Claire's face crumpled. I made the same choice as before, only heavier now because my family watched me make it. I gave them water. I gave them a flashlight with half-dead batteries. I pointed them toward a church basement a few blocks away that I'd heard mentioned on the radio as an informal shelter. I didn't open the door wide enough for them to rush. I didn't invite them into my core. When they left, Claire stared at the floor for a long time. "You did what you could," she said finally, but her voice wasn't certain. Mark exhaled. He did the only smart thing. The next days blended into a routine that felt like both work and war. In the mornings, I checked the perimeter alarms. I listened to the radio. I inventoried water. I rationed food. I taught Mark how to move quietly through the building and how to lock and brace doors without making metallic clanks that traveled down the street. Claire helped by organizing supplies, keeping the kids calm, making the break room feel less like a bunker and more like a place you could survive in without losing your mind. She made games out of silence. She turned scavenged blankets into makeshift curtains to break up the harsh industrial look. The kids adapted faster than we did. They always do. On the 3rd day, a storm rolled in. Philadelphia summer storms are quick and violent. Thunder that shakes windows, rain that turns streets into rivers, wind that makes loose signs slap against poles. The rain masked sound. That was both good and bad. Good, because infected couldn't hear as far. Bad, because scavengers knew it too. That afternoon, while thunder rolled over the city, someone tried the door again. Hard this time. Not a cautious pry, a blunt impact repeated. Mark and I froze in the corridor, listening. Another impact, then another. Someone was trying to force entry. I motioned Mark back. We retreated to the core and braced. I turned off my flashlight and listened for the telltale patterns. Human breath, muttered words, the scrape of tools. I heard a shout outside, muffled by the storm. Hit it again. Human, not infected. Then I heard something else. Metal rattling. Not from the door, but from the yard fence, like bodies pressing. The attackers were making noise. Noise drew the infected. The infected were coming. For a moment, I felt a sharp, grim clarity. In my old job, if someone did something reckless near high voltage, the system punished them. Physics doesn't care about your intentions. It just responds. The outbreak was the same kind of system now. Outside, the door impacts slowed, then stopped. A voice cursed, footsteps hurried away. Then came the fence rattle, louder. Not one body, many. The storm covered their sounds, but not completely. I could still hear the chaotic scraping, the clumsy collisions, the sudden bursts of movement. Mark whispered, "Are they in the yard?" "I don't know," I said, "but we stay quiet. We let the building do its job." Claire held the kids close, eyes wide. I could see her fighting panic, forcing it down because that's what parents do when their children are watching. Minutes passed, then an hour. The noise faded, drifting away down the street like the tide receding. When the storm finally eased, I waited another full hour before checking outside through my narrow view gap. The yard gate was intact. The fence was bent near the cut panel, but it held. Mud smeared the ground where bodies had pressed and slipped. And near the outer door, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Fresh pry marks, deep and jagged, like someone had been determined enough to keep trying if the infected hadn't arrived. We weren't invisible anymore. That night, I gathered Mark and Claire at the break room table, the flashlight between us, like a campfire. "We have to assume people will come back," I said. "More organized next time." Mark nodded grimly. Claire asked, "Can we stay here forever?" "No," I said. "This is a shelter, not a settlement." Mark leaned forward. "Then, what's the plan?" I looked at them, then at the map I'd been sketching for memory and radio fragments. Bridges, industrial buildings, water access, places with thick walls and fewer people. "There's a water treatment facility not far from here," I said. "And there are warehouses along the river, places with fences, loading docks, heavy doors. If we can reach a spot with better long-term water access, we can last." Mark frowned. "That sounds worse than here." "It might be," I admitted. "But here is becoming a target, and the longer we wait, the fewer options we'll have." Claire whispered, "What about other family?" I thought of my parents in Bucks County, of co-workers scattered across the region, of the dispatcher whose voice had warned me. "I don't know," I said honestly. "We can't save everyone. We can only move smart." The kids were asleep on the couch, curled under blankets like it was a sleepover. The innocence of it hurt. We planned the next day like a work procedure. Departure at first light. Quiet. Minimal gear. Mark would carry the heavier pack. I'd carry tools and water. Claire would carry the kids' essentials. We'd move on foot using alleys and back streets, avoiding main roads. We'd stop only if necessary. Before sleeping, I checked my phone. No new messages from Claire's friends. No new official alerts. Just the same looping emergency broadcast, like the world stuck on repeat. I walked to the vent opening and looked out over the street. The city was darker than I'd ever seen it. No street lights, no glow from windows. Just the faint reflections of the moon on wet pavement and the occasional flicker of distant firelight. In the distance, the skyline sat like a shadow cutout. I remembered all the times I'd driven through Philadelphia at night. Lights everywhere, the grid steady and strong. Invisible power making life easy. Now the grid was gone, and the city was learning what darkness really meant. I went back to the break room core and sat against the wall, listening to my family breathe, listening to the building creak as it cooled, listening for footsteps that might come again. I didn't sleep much, but sometime before dawn, I closed my eyes and let my brain drift into that half-awake state where you're not dreaming. You're just waiting. And in that waiting, I understood something that became my new rule for everything. A fortress isn't a wall. A fortress is a routine. A fortress is discipline. A fortress is the choices you make when you're tired, scared, hungry, and tempted to do something loud. At first light, we moved. We left my break room fortress behind with the conduit braces still in place, like a sealed tomb of my old life. The street air was cool and damp. The city smelled different in the early morning, more like wet concrete and less like panic. Birds still chirped. That was the strangest part. Nature didn't care. We moved along the backs of row houses, through narrow alleys littered with trash, keeping our steps soft. Mark carried a backpack with water and some food. I carried tools and a small bag of supplies that mattered more than comfort. Tape, rope, a compact first aid kit, a flashlight, and spare batteries. Claire walked between us, holding the kids' hands. The kids were quiet, eyes wide, taking in a world that suddenly had rules they didn't understand. We avoided intersections where we could. Every time we had to cross a street, I paused and listened. Mark did the same. We moved like we were crossing a live electrical yard. Slow, deliberate, aware that one mistake could end everything. Near a corner, we heard a sound that made us all freeze. A low moan, not loud, not theatrical, just wrong. I motioned everyone back against the wall, and we watched. An infected shuffled into view, alone, dragging one foot. Its clothes were torn. Its face looked slack, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. It wandered in a slow arc, bumped a parked car, then turned toward a distant sound none of us could hear. It moved away without seeing us. Claire exhaled silently. We continued. At a small playground, we found something that made Claire stop. A stuffed animal lying in the wet mulch, face down. She stared at it like it was a crime scene. "Don't," Mark whispered. Claire swallowed and kept moving, but her eyes were glassy. We reached an industrial edge near the river, where the streets widened, and the buildings changed from row houses to warehouses and fenced lots. This area had fewer hiding places, but also fewer people. I had a destination in mind. A small facility building near a larger infrastructure complex. A place with heavy doors, water access nearby, and potential supplies. As we approached, I saw movement near a loading dock. 2 men were pulling on a roll-up door, trying to force it open. They had a crowbar and a length of pipe. They were working hard, making too much noise. Mark tensed. "We go around." I nodded. We didn't have the luxury of fights. But then one of the men looked up and saw us. "Hey," he shouted. The sound echoed. My stomach dropped because it wasn't just the shout, it was what came after. From deeper in the lot, other figures turned toward us, not just those 2. A group, Scavengers. And somewhere beyond them, down the street, I saw infected drift in response to the noise like iron filings toward a magnet. Everything accelerated. Mark hissed, "Move!" We turned and headed for the nearest cover, a gap between 2 buildings that led to a fenced service yard. I remembered the layout from old work calls. If the gate was locked, we'd be trapped. If it was open, we had a chance. We reached it. The gate was chained but not locked. Someone had left it that way, maybe in a hurry. We slipped in, pulled it shut behind us, and moved deeper into the yard where large dumpsters and pallets created a maze. The Scavengers' footsteps pounded nearby. Voices shouted. One yelled, "They got gear." Claire clutched the kids, eyes wide with terror. I wanted to be angry at them, these people chasing us, making us run. But anger wastes energy. Instead, I listened for the other sound, the one that mattered more: the infected. The first moan rose from the street outside, closer now, then another, then the chaotic scrape of feet on pavement. The Scavengers' voices changed tone instantly. Fear has a sound. It sharpens. "Forget it," someone shouted. "Go!" Footsteps retreated. A car engine started, tires squealed. The infected didn't care which humans ran first. They simply followed sound and motion, drawn to wherever life still moved. We stayed still behind a stack of pallets, pressed into shadow, holding our breath. Minutes passed that felt like hours. The infected drifted through the street outside, some bumping into the fence, some wandering away. The lot's chain link rattled softly where hands brushed it, but they didn't breach. Not yet. Not this time. When the sounds finally faded, we moved again, slower now, more careful. Mark looked at me, sweat on his forehead. "Your fortress was safer." I didn't disagree, but I also knew safety was temporary in a world that was still shifting. We reached a small service building on the edge of a larger complex and found the door locked. Not a flimsy residential lock, a commercial deadbolt with a steel frame. I knelt and examined it like I would on a job site. The door itself was solid. The frame was anchored into concrete. If we tried to force it, we'd make noise and waste energy. Instead, I searched for another way. Around the side, there was a vent opening high above ground level, covered by a heavy metal grate. It was meant for airflow just like my substation's vent. I looked at it and felt a grim familiarity. Claire whispered, "Nate?" "We can get in," I said. "If we do it quietly." Mark frowned. "How?" I didn't give him a step-by-step explanation. Not because I didn't trust him, but because the world didn't need more instructions for breaking into buildings. I simply said, "Tools, leverage, patience." We worked slowly, using the building's blind spots. After a long, tense stretch, we got enough access to slip inside without sounding like a construction crew. The interior was dark and smelled like stale air, but it was dry. There were concrete walls, a small office, a storage area with shelves of supplies, cleaning chemicals, boxes of gloves, cases of bottled water meant for staff, and, blessedly, a maintenance sink with a large water heater tank. I felt my knees go weak with relief. Claire hugged the kids and cried silently into their hair. Mark sagged against the wall and let out a shaky laugh that wasn't humor, just release. I did a quick sweep, checked corners, checked doors, then set about reinforcing our new core. Different building, same principles, layers, silence, routine. We had traded one fortress for another, not because I wanted to abandon what I'd built, but because the world had changed around it. That night, we sat on the floor of the new building, sharing a bottle of water like it was a celebration. Claire looked at me over the dim glow of a covered flashlight. "You're good at this," she said softly. I shook my head. "I'm good at systems. This is just another system." Mark stared at the door. "How long do you think it lasts? All of this?" I listened to the distant city, faint pops, far-off shouts, the occasional metallic clang that could have been anything. "I don't know," I said, "but we don't need forever. We need tomorrow, then the next tomorrow." Outside, somewhere in the darkness, the infected wandered, drawn by echoes of metal hitting metal, by distant sounds of human desperation. Inside, behind concrete walls, we stayed quiet and kept watch. And I understood more clearly than ever why the old power substation break room had worked for as long as it did. Not because it was strong, because it taught me how to think. And in a world where the rules had changed overnight, Thinking was the only power I could still generate. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.